Hi guys, sorry that I can't be there this evening, but I'm really looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning early. I've heard you guys have to wake up at 5:30 in the morning to pray or something, which seems a bit harsh, but I'll be joining you for worship and then for the whole day. And we're going to be looking at the letter to the Philippians, which I'm very excited about. I'm actually really grateful that you guys have sort of almost forced me to look into it in more detail, because it's incredible and there's so many things that come to life, and I want to share a few of those with you. This video is largely setting the scene and asking one dominant question to get you to reflect on, which I think the letter of the Philippians is sort of geared towards, and it should help you going forward in your role on campus as a Christian Union, sharing the gospel of Jesus, making him known everywhere you possibly can. So here's my question. Have you ever backed or supported the wrong team? I, in 2016-17, for some reason got interested in American football. And I started supporting the Atlanta Falcons because I live in the Falcon estate in Clapham Junction, so you can see I'm a real hardcore fan. And it turned out that they were the best team that season, and they were doing incredibly well. They got to the Super Bowl final, which is the ultimate final of American football, and they were dominating. Even in that Super Bowl final, 3/4 of the way in, they were winning quite easily, and it looked like they were just going to walk it and they were going to lift the trophy, and I was going to feel very vindicated in deciding to support them. And then the famous final quarter happened. They scored 0 points. The opposition, the Patriots, scored 19, and they lost in one of the biggest comebacks of all time. And I felt a bit like Matt Ryan, slightly devastated. It wasn't quite as bad a career thing for me, but I just sort of thought, oh, if I wasted all this time being interested in American football, supporting this team, and then we lose in the final. So I'm still interested in American football, but I just don't support them anymore because I'm a Glory supporter, and they're rubbish now. Why am I telling you this? Well, I wonder whether the Philippian church, when Paul is writing to them, had a slight similar feeling of, have we backed the wrong team? To answer that, or to understand why they might have been feeling that, it helps us to go back into the history of the church being set up. So Philippi was the first European community that Paul and his companions, including Luke he sort of picked up probably around Troas, that kind of area, and then they travel over to Philippi. They land in Philippi, which was really the first European community that they impact. These guys are just Europeans getting on. Before Brexit, everything was happy, and they were just worrying about whatever they had to worry about. And then Paul arrives with this crazy message that they hadn't heard before, and totally overthrows the town or the city in some way, has a huge impact. So first of all, we're told that he meets with a group of women, including a woman called Lydia, who was a seller of purple goods. So an influential and probably quite rich, wealthy, and well-connected woman, it seems likely, who quickly sort of jumped on board with what he was saying, believed what he was preaching, and gets baptized, which I imagine would have been suddenly spread around and known about, and then invites him to her house, him and his little group of people. That wouldn't have been a private, like totally private affair. People would have found out about that kind of thing, who she was suddenly associating with this new guy who's just arrived in town. Word would have got out. This guy has influence and even sort of has the backing of an influential businesswoman in the area. So that's number one. Second, we discover this guy's got supernatural power. This fortune teller slave girl, who's probably known in the town for having this ability to in some way tell fortunes, sadly possessed in some way or influenced by demonic forces under the slavery of these businessmen. Oh no, not that. I was just showing you the word men. So her owners, there you go, they were making money out of her. She follows around Paul. Paul turns around and casts out the demon from her, this spirit inside of her, and completely cleanses her of that, having huge ripple effects on the owners. And it's clear that these owners had some influence. They had a voice in the local area. They contacted the magistrates. They had links in, it seems, maybe with the police at the town. This causes a bit of an uproar. But what I want you to learn about this group who've just arrived, this team who've just arrived, they've suddenly gained influence with Lydia, wealthy businesswoman. They have supernatural power to cast out this spirit or this demon from this girl. They then get thrown in prison, and you think, oh well, all finished. But no, they get busted out of prison by the God of the universe, who causes an earthquake, which seems to be associated with them. And they're busted out, and the jailer that was sort of meant to be guarding them then joins their ranks, joins their team, and gets involved and invites them around to his house. It's sort of this crazy sequence of events are the basis of the establishment of the Philippian church. That is the basis upon which this random group of people are now meeting together and starting to form a what we would call a gospel community, or what becomes essentially a church. That's the basis. That is a dramatic start to a church's life. And then Paul heads off on his different missionary journeys. What do we know about the Philippian church then? Well, Paul gives us some insight. They weren't just bystanders. They weren't just American football fans like me watching on the TV going, yay, well done, guys. No, they put the pads on and they got involved straight away. Have a look. Paul remembers their partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Immediately they got involved with spreading this message that had seen the Philippian jailer saved. Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved. And then Paul obviously expanded on that a little bit, and these guys got the heart of it and started spreading that in their local community. Not only that, but they also unified enough that we're told in chapter 4, it's at the end of the letter, Paul says, when I left Macedonia, when I headed out on further missionary work, no church entered into partnership with me except you. So these guys actually raised missionary funds for Paul and enabled him to continue going. They were that invested in this work of the gospel. They'd been impacted. They'd seen the crazy impact of when God moves into a place. They'd joined in this team, and they were backing it and they were supporting it. They were also established enough now, by the time he's writing this, to have overseers and deacons in place. So they're not just this rabble of 2 households and a few others that they were at the beginning. They've actually started to form a community, a church. They've got overseers or elders and deacons. Deacons usually, it seems, were appointed in that time in order to oversee some sort of ministry or some sort of caring for the poor, or maybe even raising funds or whatever it might be. But it's at least a sign of the fact that this is a community that's now got some sort of systems in place, and they are doing stuff maybe in the community. It's not just this original rabble. So when's Paul writing this letter? That a vaguely important question. He says here, partnership in the gospel. He remembers partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. When is now? Well, commentators slightly disagree on this. People like N.T. Wright think that it was Paul was maybe writing this possibly about 5 years later from a prison in Ephesus. But most commentators that I've seen at least would suggest that Paul is writing this about 10 years, maybe 12 years later. So let me just show you something. This is a really good website. If you haven't heard of esv.org, If you haven't heard of esv.org, I'd go on there. It's got the ESV translation of the Bible, unsurprisingly, and it's just quite nice. They do a good app as well. But here's the fun thing, is if you have an account, which is free, you get access to a free global study Bible. I've bought this ESV one, so I paid for that, but this global one is actually free. You can get this for yourselves. If you click on that, and then you go, they have this for every book of the Bible, you can go to the introduction, and here you see for Philippians, conversion of Paul around 33 AD, He starts the Philippian church, let's say 50, just to round it up or down, 50 AD, and then it's likely that he's in prison. Well, he's definitely in prison. It's likely that he's in a prison 10, 12 years later, writing this letter to the Philippians. Why is that significant? Well, just think about 10 years. All of this crazy stuff has happened. This is quite a nice cartoon that if you want to pause this video at some point and look at this, it's from a Kevin DeYoung book, just illustrate book of Acts, all illustrated like this. I quite like it. It just tells the story here of the Philippian church. And here's actually a question. Here's a tangent. You'll discover I quite like tangents. The Philippian jailer, what made him cry out, "What must I do to be saved?" Well, the suggestion is it's this question that maybe he was thinking about. Am I ready to meet this God that created an earthquake? Essentially, am I ready to meet the created God? Which is the question that really you are posing to people on campus, your friends, your people on your courses, maybe people in halls or whatever it might be, randomers that you meet during mission week. This is the question that's being posed to people. Are you ready to meet with the created God? But you can't really ask that question if you haven't properly asked it of yourself first. And I'm sure all of you, most of you have, but just pause and reflect. Have you asked this question? Or have you just been going along with church? Or just doing the right Christian stuff? But actually, the big question that is posed in this passage in Acts is, are you ready to meet with the God of the universe? Okay, let's go back into the main thing. So, the Philippians had this incredible start. It was definitely the right team. They were part of the right thing. This was God's work on this earth. And they were seeing great things happen. 10 years go by. In 10 years, a lot of things can happen. And I'm sure there were lots of successes and great things. But just think about this. 10 years later, they hear that the Apostle Paul, who started their thing, kind of their hero, has been thrown in prison. Well, initially you'd think they don't care about they're not going to worry about that because Paul gets busted out of prison, doesn't he? But in this case, they've heard that he hasn't been busted out of prison. He's still there. So what do? Well, firstly, they do the right thing. So prisons in those days didn't support you they didn't cook your meals or look after you, really. You had to look after yourself. You had to recruit your own funds and stuff like that. So these guys, of their own goodwill, like they have been supporting him before, they get together and do a collection, get some cash together, and they send it to Paul to try and help him, because the suggestion is that their fear is he's going to die in prison, and he even thinks that might be the case. They send it with a guy called Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was probably a leader type in their community, in their church. Imagine Claire Lucas, your UCCF worker, gets thrown in Wandsworth prison for preaching the gospel, and she needs some support. So you send one of your exec committee with a bunch of cash to go to her. They're cycling to Wandsworth prison, and then they get hit by a bus, and the only thing that you've heard, you see it on the news, they've been hit by a bus and they're in hospital now, in a coma, possibly going to die. That's a morbid thought, isn't it? That is kind of what was going on with Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was sent with this bag of cash to go to Paul, give him some support, and then come back and continue building this church. And you hear that Epaphroditus has got sick and is probably going to die. You don't know what's happened to the cash. And this means that Paul probably won't get the support he needs and will also potentially die. How are you feeling at this point if you're the Philippian church? Not only that, though, with Paul being in prison, it seemed there's this weird sort of phenomenon, but I guess nowadays when it's not that alien. A few people had clearly seen that Paul gets, or just preaching this gospel message, can gather a crowd, can gain support, can make you a bit of money if you do it correctly, or if you do it in a certain way. And we see Paul raises it earlier in chapter 1. He says, actually, around and about, some are preaching Christ from envy and rivalry. They're doing it out of selfish ambition. This was going on while Paul was in prison. Suddenly, other people have got hold of this message that you were founded upon, and you've been so supportive of the right thing, and now others are sort of distorting it, using it for their own means, starting to create issues in the local area. Not only that, though, but there are dogs attacking you, or on their way to attack you at least. Paul raises this issue in chapter 3. Look out for the dogs, the evildoers, those who mutilate the flesh. In Galatians, he calls them the circumcision party, which sounds like the least fun party on earth. These are people who are bringing persecution to every church. They are upsetting, messing around, badly influencing, forcing themselves on various different churches, and they seem to be on their way or already there in Philippi. There's all manner of issues going on. At this point, are you starting to think, as the Philippian church, as 10 years have gone by, you started on this massive high, this incredible sort of elated, victorious note, like everything was going right for you, even the smallest hiccup turned into a great victory kind of stuff. 10 years later, you've slumped down into this sort of situation of confusion, potential disunity, discord. You're losing your joy, you're becoming worried that your leaders are dying, and the Apostle Paul, who started your whole thing, has now been locked in prison, and God doesn't seem to be backing him up now, and he's looking like he's going to die. How are you feeling as a community? Are you feeling that potentially, weirdly, you backed the wrong horse? This team that looked so effective right at the beginning, these guys who should win the Super Bowl, have now ended up at this low point where everything seems to be going wrong. And you're starting to doubt possibly even the foundations, even the fundamental things. And you're definitely starting to doubt whether you are more than victorious. Like Paul writes in Romans, he probably would have said it to them as well. He says to the Romans, you are more than conquerors. I'm sure he said that to the Philippians as well. We are more than conquerors. And you're starting to wonder, are we just on the defensive? Are we really conquerors? That's the question I want you to ponder and think about in this session. In a couple of seconds, I'm going to ask you to pause this video and discuss, just briefly, how you think the Philippian church would have been feeling at this point. First thing, discuss how the Philippians were feeling. Second, have you ever experienced something like this, where you've started on this great spiritual high, you've been to a conference or a great weekend away, or a mission week where everything's gone well, or a baptism service, or whatever it might be, where there's just like, God is victorious kind of moment, which then slides into, after a couple of days, months, even years, this sort of spiritual slump where everything seems to be going backwards or losing traction, and you're starting to wonder, actually, where's this going? You can even see it in sort of the stories of the revival in the UK. These great awakenings in America and then here as well. Amazing revival moments from the past, 1800s, that kind of thing. And then we look at the UK now and think, is the gospel going backwards? What's going on? Have you experienced that personally in your own life? So I'd love you to discuss that. So pause this video and then discuss that question, and then remember to hit play. And I've just got a few final comments to make, maybe in about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, hopefully you were able to discuss sort of how your interaction with this Philippian church, whether you can sympathize, empathize with them, whether you sort of feel like you know how they might have felt. What I want you to do now, what I've done is I've produced loads of small videos rather than one long one. Loads of small videos that I'd like you to watch in smaller groups. Hopefully this can go around on a WhatsApp group or something like this. 5 short videos, very short videos, just snippets from the letter of Philippians to introduce an idea behind what I think is the aim, one of the aims of the letter to the Philippians. I think Paul wants them to see reality for what it really is, because through a certain pair of glasses or through a certain lens, their situation, Paul's situation, the situation of Christianity, looks very morbid and looks like they are on the losing team and all things are going badly for them. But Paul wants them to see reality for what it really is, and to see that they are truly still more than conquerors. They are on the winning side. They're on the offensive. They are marching in the right direction. And as long as they stick together and continue going, they will see victory in some way. This is not some like Hollywood, Disney version of victory and we all win and everything ends up fine. No, this is more based in reality. This is more biblical victory. But Paul is very, very confident of where the gospel is going and what's going to happen and everything like that. Paul is not shaken by this, and he doesn't want the Philippians to be shaken by this. And I think he doesn't want us to be shaken by this. So that's going to be the activity for the rest of the evening. Watch these short videos, as many or as few as you like, in small groups, and then discuss what's raised by that video and how does it make you feel? How does it give you strength? Or what does it help you to believe or think? So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you early tomorrow morning for the rest of our time together. Thanks.